Under the harsh afternoon sun, Hauwa Bello stood outside a towering apartment complex, her swollen feet aching, her empty delivery bag hanging loosely at her side. "You're late. I'm not paying for this," the wealthy client snapped, turning away without a second glance. Just minutes earlier, Hauwa had used her last strength and her last money to help a frail old woman who couldn't even stand on her own. Now she had nothing left. No payment, no food, no strength. As dizziness blurred her vision, a sleek black luxury car slowed near the gate. Inside, someone watched her carefully, and in that quiet moment, a decision was made that would change her life forever. So tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? Don't forget to subscribe if this story speaks to you. Long before anyone in a black luxury car noticed her, Hauwa Bello had already learned what it meant to disappear in plain sight. Every morning in Lagos began before the sun had fully claimed the sky. In the narrow room she rented behind a mechanic's workshop in Mushin, the air was always thick, sometimes with heat, sometimes with the smell of engine oil, sometimes with the quiet sorrow of another day beginning exactly like the last. Hauwa would wake slowly now, not because she was lazy, but because her body no longer belonged entirely to her. At 8 months pregnant, rising from the thin mattress on the floor had become a careful negotiation between pain breath and willpower. She would sit, first one hand pressed against the small of her back, the other over her belly, waiting for the dizziness to pass. Then she would whisper the same words she had whispered for weeks. "Just help me finish this day." No one was there to answer. The room contained almost nothing. A folded wrapper, 2 plastic buckets, a small gas burner with barely enough fuel, left one cracked mirror, and a metal bowl she had begun using more carefully, because replacing it would cost money she no longer had. A faded baby cloth hung from a nail on the wall. She had bought it from a roadside stall 1 month earlier, after standing there too long, imagining a child she had not yet held. It was white once, though the dust of the city had already stained it faintly brown. Hauwa stared at it every morning. It frightened her how much hope could fit into something so small. She heated water when she could. On better days, she drank weak tea and ate yesterday's bread softened over steam. On worse days, she drank water alone and told herself the baby would forgive her. Hunger had stopped feeling dramatic a long time ago. It had become practical, almost disciplined. She no longer thought, "I am starving." She thought instead, "I must not faint before noon." By 6 o'clock, she would tie her scarf, adjust the loose dress that no longer hid her pregnancy, and strap on the red delivery bag issued by Swiftcart Logistics, a company that liked to advertise speed, reliability, and smiles, though none of those things were extended to the riders and walkers who made its promises possible till. Hauwa was not even a rider in the full sense. She had once used a second-hand scooter owned jointly by 3 workers who rotated it by schedule, but after 2 falls and 1 repair bill, she could not contribute toward she had lost access to it. Now she combined buses, kiki rides, and long stretches on foot, carrying parcels through traffic that had no patience for slow bodies. Pregnancy had made her slower. Lagos punished slowness. At the company hub in Surulere, supervisors rarely greeted workers unless it was to complain. The younger men joked loudly, trying to mask their exhaustion. Some women kept to themselves, heads down, eyes trained on the scanning desk where names, order numbers, and lateness penalties appeared without mercy. Hauwa had once been friendly with a girl named Kemi, who shared sachet water with her during long afternoons, but Kemi had stopped talking as much after the rumors started. Pregnant, unmarried, still doing delivery work. People did not need the facts. They only needed a shape into which they could pour judgment. That morning, when Hauwa checked in the floor supervisor, Mr. Bassi looked up from his tablet and frowned. "You again," he said. Hauwa stood quietly. "Good morning, sir. You were 3 minutes late yesterday. The bus broke down near Ojuelegba. I didn't ask for the story. I'm sorry, sir." His eyes dropped to her stomach, then back to the screen. "You should have stopped this work by now." Hauwa said nothing, not because she agreed, because answering would change nothing. Mr. Bassi gave a dry laugh. "When customers complain, they don't complain about your suffering, they complain about delay. If you can't keep up, you resign. Resign to what hunger street corners begging." She wanted to ask him if rent collectors accepted apologies and swollen feet in place of cash. But experience had taught her that dignity sometimes meant keeping your pain unspoken in front of people who had already decided its value. He handed her 3 parcels first, then 2 more. "Ikoyi route. High-priority clients. No excuses today." "Yes, sir. And if anyone refuses delivery because you are late, it comes from your pay." Her hand tightened slightly around the scanner. "Yes, sir." As she turned away, one of the dispatch boys muttered not quietly enough, "Why do women always think tears will feed babies?" A few people laughed. Hauwa kept walking. Outside, the day had already become sharp with heat. The roads breathed dust. Yellow buses roared conductors, hanging from doorways and shouting destinations, as though the city might vanish if they did not claim it loudly enough. Street vendors lifted trays of oranges, belts, phone chargers, ground nuts, pure water. A mother dragged a crying child past a gutter. Somewhere nearby, music spilled from a shop speaker with distorted bass. Somewhere else, an argument was blooming over transport fare. Lagos never waited for anyone to recover. Hauwa began with the nearest stop, then another, then another. Each parcel had a timer. Each timer had consequences. Her ankles throbbed by mid-morning. Twice she had to stop and lean against a wall when the baby shifted hard inside her. Once outside a pharmacy, she closed her eyes and breathed through a cramp that frightened her because it felt too deep, too low. But after a minute, it passed. She told herself it was only strain. At noon, she checked the small purse tucked inside her dress. After transport fare, she had barely enough left for 1 cheap meal and part of tomorrow's bus fare. Rent was already 5 days overdue. Her landlord's wife had visited 2 nights earlier. Not with cruelty exactly, but with that flat-faced impatience poor people knew too well. "You young girls like trouble," the woman had said, standing in the doorway with arms folded. "If you cannot pay by weekend, pack your things." Pregnancy is not payment. Hauwa had stood there with her head lowered, ashamed, not because she had done something shameful, but because poverty dragged shame over everything, until even breathing felt like apology. The clinic was another weight in her mind. She had missed her last prenatal appointment because the consultation fee had increased. The nurse there, a stern woman with tired eyes, had warned her that swelling in the feet, headaches, and dizziness this late in pregnancy should not be ignored. Hauwa remembered every word. She also remembered the money required to act on them, so she kept walking. In the afternoon, she delivered food to an office tower where 2 receptionists looked at her belly before speaking to her face. She delivered documents to a man who signed without opening the door fully, as though misfortune might enter through gaps. She delivered cosmetics to a young woman who asked, "You're still working like this?" Not with admiration, but with the careful curiosity of someone examining damage from a safe distance. Hauwa smiled politely each time. She had learned that some smiles were not expressions of joy. They were shields. But beneath the shield, memory lived. There had been a time, not glamorous, not easy, but lighter, when she had believed her life was moving forward. She had come to Lagos from Kaduna with her aunt after secondary school, worked first in a provision shop, then at a small restaurant, then joined delivery logistics, because the pay, though unstable, was better than serving tables. She had met the father of her child in that middle period between struggle and disaster, when hope could still disguise itself as ordinary kindness. He had spoken gently at first. He had admired her seriousness. He had promised not extravagance but steadiness, and that had seemed more believable. Hauwa, who had never asked life for miracles, had mistaken consistency for safety. When she became pregnant, his calls changed. Then his visits changed. Then his tone changed. After that, he disappeared in stages so gradual that for a while she kept thinking the man she loved might return if she said the right thing, waited the right number of days, forgave the right offense. Instead, she learned the brutal patience of abandonment, how a person could leave long before they stopped speaking and stopped speaking, long before you admitted they were gone. She told almost no one the full story. In Lagos, a pregnant woman alone did not receive sympathy as often as people imagined. She received advice, too late, judgment too early, and concern only when wrapped in gossip. Still, Hauwa protected the child in her mind. She refused to call the baby a mistake, even on nights when fear sat on her chest like a stone. She spoke softly to her belly while washing clothes, while waiting for buses, while lying awake through generator noise and mosquitoes. Sometimes she imagined a little girl with calm eyes. Other times a boy with stubborn quiet. She never held one image for long because she feared loving too specifically what life had not yet placed safely in her arms. Late that afternoon, after another delayed bus and another long walk under punishing heat, she paused outside a roadside food stall. The smell of fried plantain and beans nearly weakened her knees. She bought the cheapest portion she could afford, a small wrap of akara and one sachet of water, and stood under a faded umbrella to eat. A boy of about 9 stood nearby barefoot, holding a tray of chewing gum packets. He stared at the akara without asking. Hauwa hesitated only a second. Then she broke off half and held it out to him. The boy blinked. For me? Yes. Eat before someone stronger buys all the hunger in this city. He smiled, then sudden shy brawal. He took it and ran. The food seller watched her. You'll give away your own meal like that. Hauwa shrugged, though hunger pinched at her instantly. He looked hungrier. The woman snorted, but not unkindly. Good heart will make this city beat you. Hauwa drank a little water. Maybe, but I don't know how. To become another person. She adjusted her delivery bag and looked down the road toward her next stop, where traffic shimmered in the heat and people moved as if their own burdens were the only ones that mattered. She did not know that before the day ended, one choice, small, costly, and completely in character, would place her in the path of a destiny no amount of planning could have arranged. For now, she was still only Hauwa Bello, tired, hungry, judged, carrying a child alone through a city that rarely noticed who was breaking beneath it. And yet somewhere inside her exhaustion, something remained unbroken. It was not strength in the loud way people admired. It was quieter than that. It was the stubborn refusal to let pain teach her cruelty. By late afternoon, the sun had begun to soften, but Lagos did not grow gentler with it. The traffic thickened, impatience sharpened, and the city seemed to pulse faster as if racing towards something only it understood. Hauwa Bello adjusted the strap of her delivery bag and stepped off a crowded bus near Yaba, her legs stiff from standing too long. The conductor had barely waited for her to descend before shouting for the next passengers, the bus already pulling away as she steadied herself on the roadside. Her body ached in layers now. Not just the dull, constant pain in her lower back, not just the swelling in her feet that made every step feel heavier than the last. There was something deeper, too, an exhaustion that settled into her bones and refused to leave. Still, she checked her phone. 2 deliveries left, both marked urgent, both in areas where delays were not forgiven. She inhaled slowly, pressing her palm against her belly as the baby shifted again. Just a little more, she whispered. The first stop was straightforward, a boutique clothing store where the manager barely looked at her before signing. The second, however, required her to cross a busy intersection, near a row of pharmacies and private clinics, a place where wealth and desperation often stood side by side, without ever acknowledging each other. As she approached, she noticed the crowd first. Not large, not dramatic. Just a small cluster of people, gathered near the entrance of a pharmacy, some watching, some whispering, most simply waiting for whatever spectacle had momentarily broken the monotony of their day. Hauwa slowed. Something about the stillness of the group felt wrong. She shifted her path slightly, intending to pass without involvement. She had learned that in Lagos, stopping too often for things that were not yours could cost you everything. But then she heard a voice. Weak, strained. Please, just help me stand. Hauwa turned. At the edge of the pavement, near the pharmacy door, an elderly woman leaned awkwardly against the wall. Her wrapper was clean, but worn, her headscarf slightly loosened as though she had tried to fix it and failed. One of her sandals had slipped halfway off, and her hand trembled where it pressed against the wall for support. A young man standing nearby laughed lightly. "Mama, if you cannot stand, why did you come out?" Another woman shook her head. These old people like to disturb everyone. No one stepped forward. The pharmacy attendant inside glanced once, then looked away. Hauwa felt something tighten in her chest. She looked down at her phone again. 16 minutes overdue. If she delayed further, the client would likely refuse the order. If that happened, the cost would come out of her already thin pay. She might not afford food the next day. She might miss another clinic appointment. She might lose everything she was still barely holding together. She knew all of this. She stood there, caught between two truths, one that was urgent, one that was right. The old woman's hand slipped slightly against the wall. Her body swayed. "Please," she whispered again, softer this time. Hauwa closed her eyes briefly. Then she exhaled and stepped forward. "Let me help you, Mama," she said gently. The murmuring crowd shifted, not with relief but with mild curiosity, as though watching someone volunteer for unnecessary trouble. Hauwa placed her delivery bag carefully on the ground and moved closer. Up close, she could see that the woman's breathing was uneven, her skin slightly damp despite the fading heat. "Can you hold my arm?" Hauwa asked. The woman nodded faintly. Hauwa guided her slowly, supporting her weight as best she could, despite her own condition. The effort sent a sharp pain through her back, but she held steady. "What happened?" Hauwa asked. "I came for medicine," the woman replied between breaths. "But I felt dizzy. Did you eat today?" A pause. Then a quiet answer. "No." Hauwa swallowed. Of course, she had heard that answer too many times. "Let's sit you down first," she said. She looked around. No one moved to assist. No one offered a chair. So Hauwa helped the woman lower herself onto a low concrete ledge beside the pharmacy. "Stay here," she said softly. "I'll get you water." She turned to the small kiosk across the street, ignoring the protest from her aching legs, and bought a sachet of water, with part of the money she had been saving for transport. When she returned, she knelt slightly, handing it to the woman. "Drink slowly." The woman obeyed, her hands still trembling. Hauwa then glanced toward the pharmacy entrance. The delivery parcel in her bag felt suddenly heavier, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Time, money, survival. She could still leave. She could still complete the delivery return and hope the woman would manage. But she already knew the truth. The woman might not. Hauwa stood and walked into the pharmacy. Inside, the air was cooler, sterile. Shelves lined with medicine stretched behind the counter. The attendant looked up with mild irritation. "Yes," that woman outside Hauwa said. "She needs help. She said she came for medicine." The attendant shrugged. "She has no prescription, no money. What do you want me to do?" Hauwa hesitated. "How much is the basic treatment for dizziness?" "Something simple." The attendant eyed her, then named a price. It was more than Hauwa had left. For a moment, everything inside her went quiet. She thought of her empty room, of the landlord's warning, of her missed clinic visit, of the baby inside her. Then she reached into her purse, anyway. Her fingers closed around the crumpled notes. She placed them on the counter. "Give me what you can for this." The attendant counted quickly, then gathered a few basic items: oral rehydration salts, mild medication. Hauwa took them without argument. When she stepped back outside, the crowd had already begun to disperse, interest fading, now that the moment was no longer entertaining. She knelt beside the woman again. "I got you something," she said gently. The woman looked at her, eyes clearer now but searching. "You shouldn't have." "It's okay," Hauwa replied. It wasn't, but she said it anyway. She helped the woman take the medicine, then waited until her breathing steadied. Minutes passed, then more. Hauwa checked her phone again, now over 30 minutes late. Her chest tightened. She imagined the client's reaction, the complaint, the deduction from her pay. But when she looked back at the woman, something inside her settled. "You can't stay here alone," Hauwa said. "Where do you live?" The woman hesitated, as if measuring something unseen. "Not far," she said finally. "Then I'll help you get there." "You've already done enough." Hauwa shook her head. "Let me finish what I started." Slowly, carefully, she helped the woman stand again. This time the woman leaned on her more steadily. They began to walk, step by step, past the pharmacy, past the people who had already forgotten, past the moment that for Hauwa would cost her more than she could afford. And yet, she did not turn back. Because somewhere deep inside her, beyond fear, beyond hunger, beyond survival itself, there was a line she refused to cross. A line where she would become someone who walked away. And Hauwa Bello, no matter how broken life tried to make her, refused to become that person. The road from the pharmacy stretched longer than Hauwa expected, not because of the distance but because of the pace. Each step had to be measured, each movement careful. The elderly woman, Mama Zainab Lawal, leaned heavily against Hauwa's arm, now her strength returning slowly, but not enough to carry her alone. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the uneven pavement as the noise of Lagos swelled around them. Horns, voices, engines, life moving forward without pause. Hauwa adjusted her grip, wincing slightly as a sharp pain traveled up her spine. "Are you all right?" my daughter Mama Zainab asked softly. Hauwa forced a small smile. "I'm fine, Mama." It was a lie she had learned to say without hesitation. They moved past roadside vendors packing up their goods, past school children in dusty uniforms dragging their feet home, past men arguing over transport fares. No one paid them much attention. Two figures walking slowly together, one old, one young, both burdened, were not unusual enough to stop the city. "Just a little further," Mama Zainab murmured. Hauwa nodded, though her legs felt heavier with each step. The baby shifted again, pressing low, and Hauwa paused briefly, closing her eyes. "Should we rest?" Mama Zainab asked. "No," Hauwa replied gently. "If we stop too long, it will be harder to move again." Mama Zainab studied her quietly. There was something in her gaze now, something deeper than simple gratitude. Something observant. They continued. After several minutes, they turned off the main road into a quieter street, lined with older houses, some well-kept, others showing the slow wear of time. It was not a poor area, but neither was it extravagant. It sat somewhere in between, like a place that had once held wealth and now held memory. Hauwa noticed the difference immediately. The noise softened here. The air felt stiller, and yet, something about it made her uneasy. "Here," Mama Zainab said, finally stopping in front of a modest-looking gate. It was not grand, not like the towering estates Hauwa sometimes delivered to. But it was sturdy, freshly painted, with a quiet sense of order that suggested care and money. Hauwa helped her through the gate. Inside, the compound was clean, too clean for someone who had just been struggling alone on the street. Hauwa frowned slightly. Mama, do you live here alone? Mama Zainab did not answer immediately. Instead, she allowed Hauwa to guide her toward a wooden chair placed neatly under a shaded veranda. Sit, Hauwa said. Mama Zainab obeyed. Hauwa exhaled finally, easing her own weight down onto the edge of the step nearby. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence settled, not uncomfortable, but full. Hauwa wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. Her body trembled, now that it had permission to stop. You should have gone, Mama Zainab said, quietly. Hauwa looked up. What do you mean? You had somewhere else to be. I saw your phone. You were late. Hauwa hesitated, then shrugged lightly. It happens, and if you lose money because of me. Hauwa lowered her gaze. It's not the first time I've lost something. Mama Zainab watched her carefully. And what if you lose everything? The question lingered, heavy, real. Hauwa let out a slow breath. Then I will find a way again, she said simply. There was no drama in her voice, no attempt to sound brave, just truth. Mama Zainab leaned back slightly in her chair, her eyes never leaving Hauwa's face. You speak like someone who has already lost too much. Hauwa gave a faint smile. Maybe I have. Silence returned. A bird called somewhere in the distance. The faint hum of a generator drifted from a neighboring compound. Life, as always, continued around them. After a moment, Mama Zainab reached into the small cloth bag, resting beside her chair. Take this, she said. Hauwa looked up. Mama Zainab held out a folded bundle of money. Hauwa's expression changed instantly. No, Mama. You helped me. I didn't do it for money. You still need it. Hauwa shook her head. If I take it, then it means I helped you because I was hoping for something back. And if you don't take it, Mama Zainab asked, gently, does that mean you do not need it? The question struck deeper than expected. Hauwa's fingers tightened slightly against her dress. Of course she needed it. She needed it more than she could explain, for food, for rent, for the baby. But something inside her resisted. Not pride, something else. I need it, Hauwa admitted softly. But I don't want to become someone who only does good when there is something waiting at the end. Mama Zainab studied her for a long moment. Then slowly she lowered the money. A faint smile touched her lips. Good, she said quietly. Hauwa frowned slightly. Mama, nothing. Mama Zainab replied, just thinking. Hauwa shifted, preparing to stand. I should go. I still have a delivery. She reached for her bag, her movements slower now, her strength clearly fading. Before she could rise fully, a voice called from inside the house. Mama. A young housemaid stepped out, her eyes widening at the sight. Mama, where did you go? We've been looking everywhere. Hauwa froze. Looking everywhere. The maid rushed forward, kneeling beside Mama Zainab. Are you all right? Why didn't you call Al-Haji has been worried? She stopped suddenly, noticing Hauwa. Her gaze flickered from Hauwa's worn clothes to her swollen belly, then back to Mama Zainab. Confusion filled her face. Mama. Who is she? Mama Zainab did not answer immediately. Instead, she turned her head slightly, her eyes resting on Hauwa once more. There was something different in her expression now. Not weakness, not dependence, but authority. Quiet, controlled. She is someone who helped me, Mama Zainab said calmly. The maid straightened, still uncertain. Should I call Al-Haji? A brief pause. Then Mama Zainab replied, no. Hauwa's heart skipped. Something about the way she said it felt deliberate, measured, as though a decision had just been made. Hauwa stood slowly, adjusting her bag. I should leave now, she said. Mama Zainab nodded. Yes, you should. But her eyes did not move. They followed Hauwa, studying, weighing, remembering. Hauwa hesitated for just a second. Then she gave a small nod. "Take care of yourself, Mama. And you, my daughter." Hauwa turned and walked toward the gate. Each step felt heavier than before, not just from exhaustion, but from something she could not explain. A feeling, as though something unseen had shifted. Behind her, Mama Zainab remained seated, her gaze fixed on Hauwa's retreating figure. Only when the gate closed did she speak again. "Find out everything about her," she said quietly. The maid blinked. "Mama, her name, where she lives, who she is." There was no weakness left in her voice now, only command. "And be careful," Mama Zainab added softly. "Do not let her know." The maid nodded quickly. "Yes, Mama." Mama Zainab leaned back in her chair, her fingers resting lightly against the armrest. A slow, thoughtful expression crossed her face. Not curiosity, not pity. Something far more deliberate. She did not hesitate, she murmured to herself. Outside the gate, Hauwa walked back into the noise of Lagos, her phone vibrating with missed calls, her delivery already marked overdue. Her world was still the same. Still fragile, still uncertain, but without knowing it, she had just stepped into someone else's world. A world where decisions were not made out of survival, but out of choice. And somewhere between those two worlds, her fate had quietly begun to change. By the time Hauwa Bello stepped back onto the main road, the city felt louder than before, almost as if Lagos itself was reminding her that kindness did not pause consequences. Her phone vibrated again. 3 missed calls, 2 warning notifications, 1 final message from the Swiftcart system: delivery delayed, client complaint logged, penalty applied. Hauwa stopped walking. For a moment she simply stared at the screen. Then she exhaled slowly. Of course, she had expected this. Still, expectation did not soften reality. She resumed walking, her steps heavier now, not just from exhaustion but from the quiet weight of loss. That delivery had been one of her higher-paying orders for the day. Losing it meant more than just missing a payment. It meant shifting everything else out of balance. Food, transport, savings. The fragile line she walked every day had just become thinner. She reached the client's building anyway, though she already knew it was too late. The security guard barely looked at her. "They said to cancel," he muttered. "You wasted their time." Hauwa nodded. "I understand." She did not argue. There was no point. As she turned away, she heard laughter from inside the compound. Light, careless laughter. The kind that belonged to people whose days were not determined by minutes lost or money deducted. For a brief second, something bitter rose in her chest. But she swallowed it. Bitterness was heavy, and she was already carrying too much. That evening, Hauwa returned to the Swiftcart hub to complete her checkout. The atmosphere was as it always was: loud, impatient, transactional. Workers rushed in and out, scanning codes, handing in receipts, arguing over discrepancies. When Hauwa approached the desk, Mr. Bassi did not look pleased. "You lost a priority client today." "Yes, sir." "You think this is charity work?" "No, sir." "Then why are you behaving like it is?" Hauwa hesitated. There were many answers she could give. None of them would matter. "I made a mistake," she said quietly. Mr. Bassi scoffed. "Mistake? Your mistake costs the company money. And now it costs you." He tapped on his tablet, then turned the screen toward her. The deduction was clear, more than she had feared. Her throat tightened slightly. "That is almost half my daily earnings," she said before she could stop herself. Mr. Bassi shrugged. "Then don't be late next time." If you cannot handle the work, you leave," he cut in sharply. "We have people waiting to take your place." Silence. Hauwa lowered her eyes. "Yes, sir." He turned away, already dismissing her. Conversation over. Value measured. Decision made. Hauwa stepped aside, her chest heavy but her face calm. She had learned long ago that survival sometimes required swallowing moments that deserved protest. Outside, the sky had begun to darken into evening. The air cooled slightly, though the city remained restless. Streetlights flickered on one by one. Vendors lit small lanterns beside their stalls. The smell of roasted corn drifted through the air. Hauwa stood at the roadside, calculating silently. After deductions, after transport, she would barely have enough to eat. And tomorrow would come just as quickly. She reached into her purse, counting the remaining notes carefully. Then she folded them back and tucked them away. Not enough for comfort, but enough to continue. For now, across the city, in a part of Lagos where silence was protected and security gates opened without question, Mama Zainab Lawal sat in her private sitting room. The transformation was complete. Gone was the fragile woman leaning against a pharmacy wall. Here she sat upright, composed her wrapper, neatly arranged her posture, steady her presence commanding without effort. A tray of tea rested untouched beside her. The maid from earlier stood nearby, nervous. "I have started asking questions, Mama," she said carefully. "Her name is Hauwa Bello. She works with a delivery company. She lives in Mushin." Mama Zainab nodded slowly. "Mushin," she repeated. Her eyes softened slightly, not with pity but with understanding. "And her family, not here. She came from the north. People say she is alone." Mama Zainab leaned back. "Pregnant," she added quietly. "Yes, Mama." A brief silence followed. Then Mama Zainab spoke again. "And the father of the child." The maid hesitated. "There are rumors. They say he is from a wealthy family. But he left her." Mama Zainab's gaze sharpened slightly. "Left her, or was made to leave?" "I'm not sure, Mama." Mama Zainab said nothing for a moment. Then she gave a small, thoughtful nod. "Continue," she said. "Yes, Mama. She helped you without asking for anything," the maid added after a pause. Mama Zainab's lips curved faintly. "I know." At that same moment, in another part of the house, a man stood near a wide glass window overlooking the city. Al-Haji Idris Lawal, tall, composed, dressed in quiet luxury that spoke not of display, but of certainty. He held a phone loosely in one hand, his expression unreadable. "You called for me?" he asked as he entered the room. Mama Zainab looked up. "Yes." He took a seat across from her. "What is it?" She studied him for a moment. Then she said simply, "I met someone today." Idris raised an eyebrow slightly. "That is not unusual. This one is different." He leaned back unconvinced. "You say that often." "No," she replied calmly. "I observe often. I rarely speak." That caught his attention. He placed his phone aside. "Tell me." Mama Zainab described the encounter. Not dramatically, not emotionally, but with precision. The hesitation, the choice, the refusal to accept money, the quiet strength. When she finished, Idris remained silent for a moment. Then he exhaled softly. "So, a kind girl helped you," he said. "That still does not make her different from the many others you have seen." Mama Zainab shook her head. "No, it is not the kindness alone." Then what she had every reason not to stop. Idris said nothing. She was late. She was tired. She had nothing to gain, everything to lose. Mama Zainab leaned forward slightly. And yet, she chose to stay. Silence settled between them. Idris's gaze shifted slightly, thoughtful now. "That is rare," Mama Zainab continued. "Not kindness, but choosing it when it costs something real." He nodded slowly. "Yes, that is rare." Another pause. Then he asked, "What do you want me to do?" Mama Zainab smiled faintly. "Nothing, for now." Idris frowned slightly. "You called me here for nothing, I called you," she said gently, to remember that not everything valuable announces itself loudly. He studied her. And this girl, Hauwa Bello, Mama Zainab nodded. Yes. You believe she is important. Mama Zainab's eyes held his. I believe, she said slowly, that she is someone life is testing. Idris leaned back, considering. And you want to interfere? Mama Zainab shook her head. No. A small pause. Then she added, I want to watch. Back in Mushin, Hauwa pushed open the door to her small room. The familiar heat greeted her. The quiet, the stillness. She set down her bag carefully, her movements slower now. Her body ached deeply, more than usual. She lowered herself onto the mattress with a soft exhale, one hand resting protectively over her belly. For a moment she closed her eyes. Then she whispered softly, We made it through today. The baby shifted in response. A small movement, but enough. Hauwa smiled faintly. Outside, the sounds of Lagos continued. Voices, engines, distant music. Inside, everything was still. She had lost money. She had risked everything. And yet, she did not regret it. Because somewhere beneath the exhaustion, beneath the fear, beneath the uncertainty, there was a quiet peace. The kind that came not from comfort, but from knowing she had not betrayed herself, and far away in a world she did not belong to. Someone had begun to notice. The next morning arrived without ceremony. For Hauwa Bello days did not begin with motivation or rest, they began with necessity. She woke before dawn again, her body protesting more than usual. A dull ache settled low in her abdomen, not sharp enough to alarm her, but persistent enough to remind her that time was moving forward whether she was ready or not. She sat up slowly, pressing her palm against her belly. Not yet, she whispered. Give me a little more time. The room was quiet, but not peaceful. The air felt heavier than usual, as though even the walls understood how fragile everything had become. She had not eaten properly the night before. There had simply not been enough. Still she rose, because hunger could be delayed, but rent could not. Work could not. Life could not. At the Swift Card Hub, the mood was no different from the day before. If anything, it was worse. When Hauwa stepped in, a few heads turned briefly, not out of concern but recognition. The pregnant girl who lost a premium delivery. The one who could not keep up. The one who would not last. Mr. Bassi noticed her immediately. You came back, he said, not hiding his surprise. Hauwa nodded. Yes, sir. I thought yesterday would teach you something. It did, sir. And what did you learn? Hauwa hesitated. Then she answered carefully. To be faster. It was not the full truth, but it was the one he would accept. Mr. Bassi studied her for a moment, then gave a short nod. Good, because today you don't get second chances. He handed her fewer parcels than usual. Lower priority, lower value. A quiet demotion, without needing to say the word. Hauwa accepted them without complaint, because even less was still something. Across the city, in a quiet office, lined with polished wood and muted elegance, Alhaji Idris Lawal sat at the head of a long table. The meeting in front of him was important figures, contracts, expansion plans, but his attention was not fully present. One of his executives paused mid-sentence. Sir Idris blinked slightly, returning to the moment. Yes, continue. But his mind had already drifted, back to his mother's words. She chose kindness when it cost her something real. It was a simple statement, but it lingered, because in his world, choices were rarely made without calculation. People gave when it benefited them. People stayed when it secured something. People loved when it aligned with advantage. He had spent years watching this pattern repeat itself in different forms under different disguises. It had made him cautious, detached, unmoved, and yet, this girl, Hauwa Bello, had disrupted that pattern without even knowing it. He leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table. Rare. His mother had called her rare. That alone was enough to make him curious. Later that day, Mama Zainab sat in the garden, her presence calm but purposeful. The maid approached again. "Mama, I found more information." Mama Zainab nodded. "Speak!" "She lives alone, no husband, no support. She works every day despite her condition." A pause. "And she has been missing her clinic visits." Mama Zainab's expression shifted slightly. "Why no money?" Silence settled, not heavy, but thoughtful, and the man Mama Zainab asked quietly. The maid hesitated. "His name is Yusuf Balogan." That name carried weight, even unspoken. Mama Zainab's eyes narrowed slightly. "The Balogan family. Yes, Mama." Another pause, longer this time. "Then this is not just a story of abandonment," Mama Zainab said slowly. "It is a story of power." The maid said nothing, because there was nothing to add. Back on the streets, Hauwa moved through her deliveries with quiet determination. She worked faster today, not because her body allowed it, but because her circumstances demanded it. She skipped breaks, ignored the growing discomfort in her back, pushed past the moments where her vision blurred slightly. Each delivery completed felt like reclaiming something she had lost the day before. Not money, not stability, but control. Still, her body was reaching its limit. By mid-afternoon, the ache returned, stronger, deeper. She paused near a roadside stall, gripping the edge of a table until the wave passed. The vendor looked at her. "You should not be walking like this," he said. Hauwa managed a small smile. "I don't have a choice." The vendor shook his head. "Everyone has a choice." Hauwa looked at him quietly. Then she said, "Not everyone has options." The man had no answer. As the day stretched on, something else began to follow. Hauwa. Not visibly, not directly, but consistently. A black SUV remained several streets away, never too close, never too far. Inside, a driver and a quiet observer watched, not interfering, not announcing, just observing. Every stop, every interaction, every moment. Hauwa, of course, noticed none of it. She was too focused on staying upright. That evening, Idris sat alone in his study. The report lay in front of him. Simple, clear, detailed. Hauwa Bello. Age, work, condition, circumstances. He read it once, then again. Then he leaned back, exhaling slowly. No exaggeration, no embellishment. Just facts. And, somehow, that made it more compelling. "She is not trying to be seen," he murmured to himself. That was the difference. Most people performed goodness. She simply lived it. There was no audience, no expectation, no reward, and yet, she remained consistent. Idris stood walking slowly toward the window. The city stretched before him, alive with movement, ambition, survival. Thousands of stories, thousands of struggles, but only a few stood out. Not because they were loud, but because they were real. He picked up his phone, paused, then put it down again. Not yet. That same night, Hauwa lay on her thin mattress, her body finally still. The pain had not disappeared. It had only softened enough to let her breathe. Her hand rested over her belly. "You're strong," she whispered. "I need you to be strong." The baby moved gently. A small response, but enough. Hauwa closed her eyes. She did not know about the report. She did not know about the watching. She did not know about the decisions quietly forming beyond her world. To her, life was still simple. Work, survive, protect, endure. And yet, somewhere beyond her understanding, the path ahead was already shifting. Not because she had asked for it, not because she had planned it, but because someone had finally seen her. Not as a burden, not as a problem, but as something rare. And in a world driven by power, recognition was the first step toward change. The following days unfolded with a quiet, almost invisible tension. Nothing dramatic happened on the surface of Hauwa Bello's life. She still woke before sunrise. She still worked until her body trembled. She still counted every naira twice before spending it once. And yet, something had changed. Not in her world, but around it. On a warm afternoon, Hauwa stood outside a small grocery store in Surulere, waiting for a package to be handed over. Her legs ached, her back throbbed, and the baby had been unusually restless all morning. She shifted her weight slightly, pressing her palm against her lower belly. "Easy," she whispered. A young boy nearby watched her curiously. "Is the baby kicking?" he asked. Hauwa smiled faintly. "Yes. Does it hurt sometimes?" "Then why are you smiling?" Hauwa paused. Then she said softly, "Because not everything that hurts is bad." The boy nodded slowly, as if trying to understand something too big for his age. Before he could ask more, the shopkeeper called out, "Delivery!" Hauwa stepped forward, scanning the parcel, completing the process with practiced efficiency. No wasted motion, no unnecessary conversation. Time mattered. Everything mattered. Across the street, parked discreetly behind a line of vehicles, the same black SUV remained. Inside, the observer leaned slightly forward. "She doesn't complain," he noted. The driver shrugged. "Some people don't." "No," the observer replied quietly. "Some people perform strength. She carries it." They watched as Hauwa adjusted her bag and walked away, her pace steady despite the visible strain. "Does she know?" the driver asked. The observer shook his head. She must not. Later that day, Hauwa found herself passing through a familiar street. The pharmacy. She slowed instinctively. Her eyes scanned the area. The concrete ledge where she had helped Mama Zainab was empty. The crowd from that day was gone. Everything looked normal, as if nothing had happened. Hauwa hesitated for a moment. Then she continued walking, because in her world, moments did not linger. They passed, they disappeared, they became memory. But Mama Zainab had not forgotten. That same afternoon, she sat in her living room, speaking quietly with Idris. "You have seen the report," she said. Idris nodded. "I have," and he leaned back slightly. "She is exactly as you described." Mama Zainab's eyes softened. "No," she corrected gently. "She is more than I described." A pause. Idris studied his mother. "You want me to meet her?" It was not a question. Mama Zainab smiled faintly. "I want you to see her for yourself." Idris considered this. "And what happens after that," she said, "calmly depends on what you see." Idris exhaled slowly. "You have tried this before." Mama Zainab did not deny it. "Yes, and it never worked, because I was looking for perfection," she replied. "And now I am looking for truth." Silence settled between them. Then Idris stood. "Arrange it," he said. The opportunity came sooner than Hauwa expected. The next morning, as she checked her assigned deliveries, she noticed something unusual. A single order, high priority, high value, location Victoria Island. Her brow furrowed. This kind of order was not usually assigned to her anymore. Not after the penalty. Not after the demotion. She approached the desk. "Sir, I think there is a mistake," she said to Mr. Bassi. He barely looked up. "No mistake. It's yours." Hauwa hesitated. "Yes, sir." She took the package. Something about it felt different. Not the weight, not the label, but the situation. Still she said nothing. Work was work. The journey to Victoria Island was long. Traffic was heavy. The heat unforgiving. By the time Hauwa arrived, her energy was already low. But she straightened her posture slightly. Because places like this required a certain appearance, even when you did not belong. The building stood. Tall glass reflecting sunlight in sharp angles. Security was tight, movements controlled everything precise. Hauwa approached the gate. "Delivery," she said. The guard checked the system, then nodded. "Go in." She stepped inside her footsteps, quiet against the polished ground. Inside, the air was cool. Too cool. It always felt strange to her how some places controlled even the temperature, while others could not control whether they ate. She approached the reception desk. The woman behind it glanced at her briefly. "Name Hauwa Bello. Delivery." The receptionist checked, then picked up the phone. "He's expecting it," she said. Hauwa frowned slightly. Expecting. That was unusual. Usually clients did not wait personally. They sent assistants, but before she could think further, a voice spoke behind her. "You must be Hauwa." She turned, and for a moment, everything slowed. The man standing there was composed, calm, dressed in quiet authority. Not flashy, not loud, but unmistakably powerful. Hauwa straightened slightly. "Yes, sir. I'm Idris Lawal." The name meant something, even if she could not immediately place it. "I have your delivery." He nodded. "But I would like you to come upstairs." Hauwa blinked. "That's not necessary, sir. I can hand it here. I insist." A pause. Hauwa hesitated. Something in her instinct stirred. Not fear, but caution. Still, refusing a client could create problems. So, she nodded. "Yes, sir." Upstairs, the space was quiet, private, different from the busy lobby below. Idris gestured toward a chair. "Please sit." Hauwa shook her head slightly. "I'm fine, sir." He observed her for a moment, then said, "You helped an elderly woman recently." Hauwa froze. Her grip tightened slightly on the delivery bag. "I help many people," she replied carefully. This one was different. Silence. Hauwa's mind moved quickly. How did he know who told him? Was she in trouble? "I didn't do anything wrong," she said quietly. Idris shook his head. "No, you didn't." He stepped closer. Not imposing, not threatening, just present. "I want to understand something," he said. Hauwa said nothing. "You were late. You lost money. You were already struggling." A pause. "And yet, you stayed." Hauwa looked at him. Really looked this time. His eyes were not accusing, not judging, just searching. She exhaled slowly. Because she needed help. That's all. Hauwa tilted her head slightly. What else should there be? Idris did not answer immediately. Because, in his world, there was always something else. But in hers, there wasn't, and that difference was exactly what had brought them to this moment. For a moment after Hauwa spoke, the room held a quiet that felt heavier than silence. What else should there be? Her words lingered between them. Not defensive, not proud, simply honest in a way Idris was not used to hearing. He studied her more closely now. Not her worn dress, not her swollen feet, not even the visible strain in her posture, but the absence of calculation in her face. Most people, when standing in front of him, adjusted themselves. Their tone changed. Their posture shifted. Their eyes searched for advantage, for approval, for opportunity. Hauwa did none of that. She stood as she was, tired, careful, unapologetically real. Idris nodded slowly. "I see." Hauwa shifted slightly, uncomfortable under the weight of his attention. "If there's nothing else, sir, I should go. I still have deliveries." He did not move immediately. Instead, he said, "Do you always help strangers like that?" Hauwa hesitated. Then she answered honestly, "Not always." Idris raised an eyebrow. "Why not?" "Because sometimes I can't afford to." The answer was simple, but it carried more truth than explanation ever could. Idris exhaled softly, and that day Hauwa looked down briefly, then back at him. "That day, I couldn't afford not to." Silence again, this time different, deeper. Idris felt something shift inside him. Not dramatically, Not suddenly, but enough to disturb the stillness he had lived in for years. He stepped aside. "You can go." Hauwa nodded. "Thank you, sir." She turned her movements careful but steady and walked toward the door. Just before she reached it, Idris spoke again. "Hauwa." She stopped, turned slightly. "Yes, sir. If you ever need help." He paused. The words felt unfamiliar, unpracticed. "You can come here." Hauwa held his gaze for a moment. Then she gave a small, polite nod. "Thank you." But her eyes said something else. Not rejection, but distance, a boundary shaped by experience. She left without another word. When the door closed behind her, Idris remained where he stood, still, thoughtful. Then slowly, he walked back to his desk. He did not sit immediately. Instead, he looked out the window again. The city moved, as always, loud, relentless, indifferent. But somewhere within it was a woman who had just turned down the most valuable thing many people chased without hesitation. Access, opportunity, advantage, not because she did not understand its value, but because she did not trust its intention. Idris allowed himself a small, almost imperceptible smile. "She didn't even consider it," he murmured. Behind him, Mama Zainab's voice entered the room. "Of course she didn't." He turned. She had been standing at the doorway, longer than he realized, watching, listening, and she asked. Idris walked back toward her. "You were right." Mama Zainab's expression softened. "I know. She doesn't want anything." Mama Zainab shook her head gently. "No, she wants something." Idris frowned slightly. "What dignity?" The word settled heavily, because it was something money could not easily buy, and something many people lost long before they realized it. Later that evening, Hauwa made her way back through the city. The encounter lingered in her mind, not because of who Idris was. She still did not fully understand that, but because of how he spoke, how he looked at her, not with pity, not with judgment, but with something she could not name. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. It unsettled her, not in a dangerous way, but in a way that reminded her of something she had learned long ago. Nothing given freely by the powerful came without a reason, and reasons often came with expectations. She tightened her grip on her bag. No, she would not depend on that. She could not. That night, as Hauwa lay on her mattress, the ache in her body stronger than usual, her thoughts drifted somewhere she rarely allowed them to go. Back to Yusuf Balogan. His name still carried weight in her mind. Not love, not anymore, but impact. He had not been like the others at first. That was what made it harder. He had listened, paid attention, made her feel seen. And for someone like Hauwa, who had spent most of her life unnoticed, that had been enough. Too much, perhaps. When she told him about the pregnancy, everything changed. Not immediately, not violently, but slowly. He began to talk about timing, about reputation, about family expectations, about solutions. Solutions that required her to erase something she had already begun to love. When she refused, he did not argue. He withdrew. Distance replaced conversation. Silence replaced promises. Until one day there was nothing left. No explanation. No closure. Just absence. Hauwa had learned then that some people did not leave loudly. They disappeared quietly, and expected you to understand. She placed her hand over her belly. "You're not a mistake," she whispered, "no matter what anyone says." The baby moved gently, as if answering. Across the city, in a much larger room, filled with controlled light and quiet luxury, Yusuf Balogan sat with his father. The atmosphere was tense. "You need to handle this," his father said firmly. Yusuf leaned back, frustrated. "I already told you it's over." "It's not over," the older man replied sharply. "Not if she decides to speak. She won't. You don't know that." Silence. Then his father leaned forward. "Our family name is not something you gamble with." Yusuf's jaw tightened. "She has nothing." His father's gaze hardened. "That is exactly why she is dangerous." A pause. Heavy. Meaningful. "You will make sure this situation disappears." He continued, quietly. Yusuf said nothing, but the tension in his expression said enough. The next morning, Hauwa stepped out again. Same routine, same struggle, same determination. But now, unseen forces had begun to move, not around her, but toward her, from two different worlds, one driven by control, the other driven by curiosity, and, somewhere in between, Hauwa Bello continued walking, unaware that her past and her future were already on a path to collide. The morning air carried a thin layer of dust as Hauwa Bello stepped onto the roadside, her delivery bag resting heavily against her back. Lagos had already awakened in full force, buses rattling, vendors shouting, engines groaning under pressure. And as always, no one paused long enough to notice who among them was struggling to keep up. Hauwa adjusted her scarf and began walking toward the nearest bus stop. Her body felt different today. Not weaker, but strained in a way she could not ignore. The ache in her lower back had deepened overnight. Her feet, already swollen, protested with every step, and there was a subtle tightness in her abdomen, unfamiliar, irregular, but persistent enough to make her cautious. Still, she moved forward, because stopping was not an option. At the Swift Cart hub, she received her assignments with the same quiet acceptance as always. No complaints, no requests, no expectations. Mr. Bassi barely looked at her. "Finish these on time," he said. "Yes, sir." She scanned the parcels. Routine, predictable, safe, or at least as safe as her life allowed. By mid-morning, Hauwa found herself navigating through a crowded street market. The heat had already begun to rise, mixing with the smell of spices, fried food sweat, and dust. People moved tightly around her, voices, overlapping, transactions happening in rapid bursts of urgency. She moved carefully, protecting her balance, her belly, her pace. "Delivery," she called out as she reached a small electronics stall. The owner signed quickly, barely glancing up. Transaction complete. No delay, no problem. For once, things were smooth. Across the market, a familiar black SUV remained parked discreetly. Inside, the observer watched quietly. "She's slower today," he noted. The driver nodded. "She's reaching her limit." The observer said nothing, but his gaze remained fixed. Hauwa continued. Another delivery, then another. Each one completed with growing effort. Her breathing became slightly uneven, her steps slightly shorter. Still, she pushed forward. Because finishing early meant saving time. Saving time meant saving money, and saving money meant survival. Around midday, Hauwa stopped briefly under a small shade near a roadside fruit seller. She pressed her hand against her belly again. The tightness returned, stronger this time. She closed her eyes, counted slowly, waited. It passed, but not completely. The fruit seller watched her. "You should sit," the woman said. Hauwa shook her head. "I'll be fine. You say that too easily." Hauwa managed a faint smile. "If I say it enough, maybe it will become true." The woman sighed. "You young people think strength means ignoring pain." Hauwa looked at her quietly. "Sometimes it does." She adjusted her bag again and kept moving. The next delivery took her into a quieter street, lined with gated houses and trimmed hedges, where the noise of the market faded into controlled silence. As she approached the final address, she slowed slightly. Something about the place felt familiar, not visually, but instinctively. The gate opened before she could knock. Hauwa frowned slightly. Inside stood a young man in simple clothing, not dressed like security, but not casual either. "You're expected," he said. Hauwa blinked. Expected. Again. She stepped inside cautiously. The compound was calm, orderly, and then she saw him, Idris Lawal, standing near the entrance, waiting. Hauwa stopped. For a moment, confusion flickered across her face. Then she straightened slightly. "Sir, I have a delivery." Idris nodded. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. "You came back," he said. Hauwa hesitated. "I was assigned here." Idris studied her, noticed the way she shifted her weight, the slight tension in her posture. "You're not well," he said. Hauwa shook her head quickly. "I'm fine." The same answer, automatic, instinctive. Idris did not accept it this time. "You're in pain." Hauwa's jaw tightened slightly. "It's nothing." Another lie, but this one was thinner, more fragile. Idris stepped closer. "Sit down." Hauwa took a small step back. "No, sir. I just need to finish my delivery. Sit." His voice was calm, but firm. Hauwa hesitated. Then slowly, she lowered herself into the nearest chair. The relief was immediate, and harder to hide than she expected. Idris noticed. Of course he did. He turned slightly. "Bring water." A staff member appeared almost instantly. Efficiency, control, a different world. Hauwa accepted the water quietly. "Thank you." She drank slowly, her hands trembling slightly now that she was no longer forcing herself to stay strong. Idris watched, not intrusively, but carefully. "How far along are you?" he asked. Hauwa hesitated. 8 months. "And you're still working like this?" It was not a question. Hauwa looked at him. "What choice do I have?" Idris did not answer immediately, because for the first time, he realized something uncomfortable. In his world, there were always choices. In hers, there were none. A moment passed, then another. Then Hauwa shifted slightly, preparing to stand. "I should go." But as she tried, the pain returned, sharper, sudden. She froze, her hand gripping the edge of the chair, her breath catching. Idris stepped forward immediately. "Hauwa." She shook her head. "It's okay." But it wasn't. The pain lingered, then slowly faded. Hauwa exhaled. "I'm fine." Idris did not move away. "You need a doctor." "I can't afford one." The truth came out before she could stop it. Silence followed. Heavy, real. Idris looked at her, not as a stranger, not as an observer, but as someone who now understood the weight of what she was carrying. Not just the child, but everything around it. "You don't have to do this alone," he said quietly. Hauwa looked at him, her expression calm, but guarded. "Yes," she said softly, "I do." The answer was not rejection. It was reality, a boundary shaped by everything she had already survived. Idris stepped back slightly. He understood now. This was not a situation he could fix with money, not directly, not easily. Because what she protected was not just survival, it was control, dignity, self, and those things could not be given. They had to be respected. Hauwa stood slowly this time. The pain had eased enough. She picked up her bag. "I've completed the delivery," she said. Idris nodded. "Yes." A pause. Then he said, "Hauwa." She looked at him. "If something happens, if you need help." He stopped, because he knew repeating the same offer would not change her answer. So instead, he said, "Just come." Hauwa held his gaze for a moment. Then she nodded once. "Thank you." And this time, there was something different in her voice. Not acceptance, but acknowledgement. As she walked out of the compound, the sun dipped lower in the sky. The city continued as always, unchanged, unaware. But behind her, Idris remained standing, watching, thinking, because now it was no longer curiosity. It was something deeper, something more dangerous, something that would not let him return to indifference. And ahead of her, Hauwa walked forward, still alone, still struggling, still carrying everything, but step by step. Her world was moving closer to a turning point she could no longer avoid. The following days did not bring relief. If anything, they brought pressure. Not the loud, dramatic kind, but the quiet, tightening kind that built slowly until there was no space left to breathe. For Hauwa Bello, everything began to feel closer. Closer to breaking, closer to ending, closer to something she could not yet name. 3 days after her second visit to Idris Lawal's residence, the rumors began. Not suddenly, not openly. But like most things in Lagos, they spread through whispers first. At the Swift Cart hub, Hauwa noticed the change before she understood it. Conversations paused when she entered. Eyes lingered longer than usual. Voices dropped not enough to hide, but enough to signal something was being said. She ignored it, at first, because ignoring things had always been her way of surviving. But then Kemi, the only person who had ever shown her consistent kindness, approached her quietly near the back of the loading area. "Hauwa," she said carefully. Hauwa looked up. "What is it?" Kemi hesitated, then lowered her voice. "They're talking about you." Hauwa's expression did not change. "People always talk. This is different." A pause. Hauwa waited. They said, "You've been going to a rich man's house." Silence. Kemi watched her closely. "I went there for a delivery," Hauwa said calmly. Kemi nodded quickly. "I know, I believe you." Another pause. "But they don't." Hauwa exhaled slowly. "Let them think what they want." Kemi frowned. "It's not just that." Mr. Bassi heard it. That mattered, not because of truth, but because of consequences. Later that morning, Hauwa was called into the small office near the dispatch desk. Mr. Bassi did not offer her a seat. "You've been busy," he said. Hauwa stood quietly. "I've been working at a private residence." "Yes, assigned deliveries." Mr. Bassi leaned back slightly. "And how many of our workers get assigned repeatedly to high-value locations?" Hauwa said nothing, because she did not know, and because answering would not help. He tapped his fingers against the desk. "You think I don't understand how this works? I didn't do anything wrong, sir." His gaze sharpened. "They say you're using your situation to gain attention." Hauwa felt something cold move through her chest. "My situation. Your pregnancy." The word landed heavier than expected. "You think rich men don't notice things like that," he continued. "You think they don't feel sympathy." Hauwa's hands tightened slightly at her sides. "I didn't ask for anything. That's not how it looks." Silence. Then Hauwa spoke quietly. "I came here to work." Mr. Bassi studied her. Longer this time. Then he sighed. "Whether you asked or not, perception matters." He leaned forward. "And right now your perception is a problem." Hauwa held his gaze. "What do you want me to do?" "Stay away from that place. I can't control assignments. You can refuse them." Refuse work." Hauwa almost laughed, but she didn't, because nothing about this was funny. "If I refuse, I lose income. If you don't, you lose this job." The choice settled heavily between them. Not a real choice, just two different forms of loss. That afternoon, Hauwa worked in silence. No conversation, no distraction, just movement, task after task. But something inside her had shifted. Not broken, not yet, but strained. Because for the first time, her survival was being questioned. Not by circumstance, but by perception. Across the city, Idris sat in his office, reviewing documents that had nothing to do with his thoughts. He had not expected to think about Hauwa again so soon. But now, he could not ignore it. Because the moment he stepped outside his private world, he began to hear it. Whispers, speculation, assumptions. She's trying to trap him. She knows what she's doing. These girls always have a plan. Idris listened, not because he believed them, but because he recognized something deeper. The speed at which people judged, the ease with which they reduced someone's life to a convenient narrative. He placed the document down, and for the first time, he felt something close to anger, not loud, not explosive, but controlled, focused. That evening, Mama Zainab noticed it immediately. "You're thinking too loudly," she said. Idris glanced at her. "They've started talking." Mama Zainab nodded. "Of course they have." He frowned slightly. "You expected this." "I expected people to reveal themselves," she corrected. Idris leaned back. "They're attacking her." "No," Mama Zainab said calmly. "They are exposing themselves." A pause. "She has done nothing," Idris added. "And yet, she carries the weight of their assumptions." Mama Zainab looked at him carefully. "And what will you do about it?" Idris hesitated. That was the question. Because action would change everything. That same night, Hauwa sat on the edge of her mattress, staring at the small amount of money in her hand. Less than before. Always less. She counted it once, then again. Then she closed her fingers around it. Tomorrow she would need to choose. Between food and transport. Between rest and work. Between safety and survival. Her body ached more than usual. The tightness had returned. More frequent now, more insistent. She pressed her hand against her belly. "Not yet," she whispered again. "I'm not ready." The baby shifted. A reminder. Time was not waiting. The next morning came with a decision she had not planned to make. At the hub, when she received her assignments, there it was again. Victoria Island, same address, same name. Hauwa stared at the screen. Her mind replayed Mr. Bassey's warning. Stay away, or lose everything. Her fingers tightened slightly. Around her, the noise of the hub continued. Unaware, unconcerned, but inside her, everything slowed. Because this time, it was no longer just about work. It was about consequence, choice, and the cost of both. She lifted her head, looked at the screen one last time, and realized something she had been avoiding. No matter what she chose, something would break. The assignment screen did not change. Victoria Island, same address, same name. Hauwa Bello stared at it, longer than she should have. Around her, the swift cart hub moved, as always, voices overlapping scanners, beeping footsteps rushing. But for a moment, everything felt distant, as if she were standing slightly outside her own life, watching a decision form before she fully understood it. Refuse the delivery. Lose the job. Accept the delivery. Risk everything else. Neither option offered safety, only consequence. Hauwa, Mr. Bassey's voice cut through the noise. She looked up. "Well," he asked. "You're delaying again." Hauwa lowered her gaze briefly. Then she scanned the order. "I'll take it, sir." His expression hardened. "That's your choice." "Yes, sir." But it did not feel like one. The journey to Victoria Island was slower than usual. Not because of traffic, but because of the weight in Hauwa's chest. Every step felt measured. Every movement carried thought. She was not afraid of Idris, not exactly. But she was afraid of what his world represented. Power, visibility, expectation, things that did not exist quietly, things that changed everything they touched. And Hauwa had built her survival on remaining unnoticed, on staying small enough to move through life without being crushed by it. This was different. When she arrived, the gate opened again, before she could knock. The same quiet efficiency, the same controlled environment. Hauwa stepped inside. This time she did not look around. She walked directly forward, focused, careful, ready to finish and leave. But Idris was already there, waiting. He studied her as she approached. Something had changed, not in her posture, not in her expression, but in the way she carried herself. More guarded, more deliberate. "You came," he said. "I was assigned," Hauwa replied. Her tone was respectful, but distant. Idris noticed. Of course he did. He stepped aside. "Come in." Hauwa hesitated, just for a second, then followed. Inside, the air felt heavier than before. Not physically, but emotionally. Because this was no longer just a meeting between two strangers. Now there were consequences attached. Rumors, assumptions, decisions waiting to be made. Hauwa placed the package carefully on the table. "Delivery completed, sir." She turned slightly, ready to leave, but Idris spoke. "They've started talking about you." Hauwa froze, her back still to him. Of course they had. This was Lagos. Nothing remained quiet for long. She turned slowly. "I know." Idris watched her closely. "And you still came." Hauwa's expression did not change. "I need the work. Truth. Simple, unavoidable." A moment passed. Then Idris asked, "Do you know what they're saying?" Hauwa nodded slightly. "They think I'm using you." The words felt strange in the air, not because they were new, but because they were now spoken aloud. "And are you?" Idris asked. Hauwa met his gaze. "No. No hesitation, no defense, just certainty." Idris held her eyes for a moment, then nodded. "I didn't think so." Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, something both of them understood. Trust, fragile, new, uncertain. Hauwa shifted slightly. "I should go." But this time, Idris did not step aside immediately. Instead, he said, "You can stop coming." Hauwa blinked. "I don't assign deliveries," she replied. "You can refuse them." The same words, different voice, different meaning. Hauwa felt something tighten in her chest. "If I refuse, I lose my job. If you don't, you lose something else." She studied him. What Idris did not answer immediately. Because the truth was not simple. Because what she risked was not something he could fully define. Reputation, safety, control, things that once lost, were not easily recovered. Hauwa exhaled slowly. "My life doesn't give me the luxury of avoiding problems," she said quietly. "I deal with them when they come." Idris stepped closer. "Not all problems should be faced alone." Hauwa's eyes flickered slightly, then steadied. "I've been alone for a long time." The statement carried no complaint, no bitterness, just fact. A brief silence. Then Idris said something different. "Yusuf Balogun." The name hit like a sudden shift in air. Hauwa's body stiffened, her expression changed, not visibly to anyone else. But enough. "You know him," Idris continued. It was not a question. Hauwa did not respond. Because responding would make it real. Because saying his name would open something she had worked hard to close. Idris watched her carefully. "They're moving against you." That got her attention. "What do you mean they don't want the situation to exist?" Hauwa's jaw tightened. "It already exists, not to them." Silence. Then Hauwa spoke quietly. "I'm not asking them for anything. That's not the point." Idris's voice remained calm, but firm. "Their problem is not what you want. It's what you represent." Hauwa looked at him. Really looked. For the first time, something like anger flickered beneath her calm. "I'm not a problem." "No," Idris said, "but to them, you are a risk." The words settled heavily, because they were true, because Hauwa had already felt it. Without understanding it fully, she turned slightly. Processing, breathing, thinking. Then she asked, "What are they going to do?" Idris did not soften the answer. Whatever they believe will make you disappear quietly. Silence. Deep. Cold. Real. Hauwa closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. Steady. Focused. I'm not going anywhere. The statement was quiet, but firm. Idris nodded slowly. I didn't think you would. Another pause. Then Hauwa reached for her bag. This time, Idris did not stop her, because now he understood something important. She was not someone who could be protected by force. She had to choose everything on her own terms. As she walked toward the door, Hauwa felt the weight of what she had just learned settle into her body. Not fear, not panic, but awareness. Her past was no longer behind her. It was coming back, and this time, it was not coming quietly. Behind her, Idris remained still, watching, thinking, because the situation had changed. This was no longer curiosity, no longer observation. This was conflict, real, immediate, dangerous, and for the first time, he had to decide. Not whether Hauwa was different, but whether he was willing to stand beside that difference when it cost something. Outside the city continued as always, unaware, unchanged. But Hauwa walked forward with something new inside her. Not hope, not fear, something sharper, something clearer. The understanding that survival alone might no longer be enough, because what was coming next would not allow her to remain invisible. The city did not change for Hauwa Bello, not after what Idris told her, not after the quiet warning wrapped in calm words. Lagos remained loud, impatient, and indifferent, as if danger when it came should be handled privately and without disruption. But inside, Hauwa, something had shifted. Not fear, not panic. Something steadier, awareness. That night, sleep did not come easily. She lay on her thin mattress, one hand resting over her belly, the other curled loosely against her chest. Her room felt smaller than usual, not physically, but mentally, as if the walls had drawn closer. Yusuf Balogun. She had not said his name in months, not out loud, not even in thought if she could help it. But now, it returned, not as memory, but as presence. And presence meant movement, which meant something was coming. She closed her eyes, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to remember. Not everything, just enough. Yusuf had not been cruel in the beginning. That was what made it dangerous. He had been patient, attentive, careful. He had noticed things, small things. The way she folded her scarf, the way she counted money twice, the way she avoided asking for help even when she needed it. He had made her feel seen, and for someone like Hauwa, that had been enough. Too much, perhaps, because once you feel seen, you begin to believe you matter. And once you believe that, you begin to trust. The memory shifted to the day she told him, the quiet space between them, the moment his expression changed, not dramatically, but enough. He had not shouted, had not argued. He had simply stepped back, emotionally, mentally, then gradually, physically. Hauwa opened her eyes. The ceiling stared back, unchanged, unconcerned. She exhaled slowly. "You're not coming back," she whispered. Not to him, to the past. And this time, she believed it. The next morning, Hauwa moved differently. Not slower, not faster, but more aware. Her surroundings, her steps, her timing. Every movement carried intention now, because Idris's words had not left her. They will make you disappear quietly. That was not something she could ignore. At the Swiftcart hub, the atmosphere remained tense. The rumors had not stopped. If anything, they had settled into something more permanent, less loud, more certain. People no longer whispered as much. They simply assumed. Hauwa felt it, in the way conversations shifted, in the way eyes avoided hers, in the way silence followed her presence. Kemi approached her again. "You should be careful," she said quietly. Hauwa nodded. "I know. They're not just talking anymore." Hauwa looked at her. "What do you mean?" Kemi hesitated. "Someone came asking about you yesterday." A pause. "Not from the company." Hauwa's chest tightened slightly. "What did they want? I don't know. They didn't say much, just asked questions. About what, where you live, your schedule." Silence. Then Hauwa asked softly, "What did you tell them?" Kemi shook her head quickly. "Nothing." Hauwa nodded. "Thank you." That afternoon, Hauwa adjusted her routine. Small changes, different routes, different timing, nothing obvious, nothing dramatic, just enough to make herself less predictable. Because unpredictability was sometimes the only protection people like her had. Across the city, Idris stood in his office, his expression unreadable. "Balogan Group has started inquiries," one of his associates reported. Idris nodded slightly. "I expected that. They're moving carefully." "Of course they are." A pause. "Do you want us to intervene?" Idris did not answer immediately, because intervention would escalate everything, and escalation would remove Hauwa's control, which he now understood, was something she would not accept easily. "Not yet," he said finally. Later that day, Mama Zainab sat quietly in the garden. Idris joined her. "They've started," he said. She nodded. "I know." A pause. "She will not ask for help," he added. Mama Zainab smiled faintly. "No, she won't. And if it gets worse," Mama Zainab looked at him, "then you must decide." Decide. What her gaze held his, whether you are watching a story or becoming part of it. That evening, Hauwa returned home earlier than usual, not because she had less work, but because her body demanded it. The pain had changed again, more frequent now, more insistent. She sat on the edge of her mattress, breathing slowly, counting, waiting. The wave passed, but it left something behind. A warning. She reached for her small bag, counted her money again. Still not enough, still never enough, but enough to continue. For now. A knock sounded at the door. Hauwa froze. No one visited her. Not here, not ever. The knock came again, soft, measured. Her heart began to beat faster, not fear, but instinct. She stood slowly, moved toward the door, careful, quiet. "Who is it?" she asked. A voice answered. Male, calm, just someone who wants to talk. Hauwa's grip tightened on the door. Her mind moved quickly. Too quickly. This was not normal. Nothing about this was normal. "What do you want?" she asked. A pause. Then the voice said, "Yusuf sent me." Silence. Deep. Heavy. Unavoidable. Hauwa did not open the door. She did not move. She did not speak. Because in that moment, everything Idris had said became real. Not abstract, not distant, real. Outside, the man waited, patient, still, not aggressive, not loud, which made it more dangerous. Inside, Hauwa stood frozen, her hand still on the door, her breath shallow, her thoughts sharp. Because this was no longer about rumors, no longer about assumptions. This was action, direct, intentional, and whatever came next would not be quiet. Behind her, the room remained unchanged, small, simple, fragile, but now it was no longer safe. Hauwa stepped back slowly, away from the door, away from the voice, her mind already moving ahead, because survival was no longer enough. Now, she would have to protect something more, not just herself, but the life she carried, and whatever future remained possible. Hauwa did not open the door. She stood still, her hand hovering inches from the handle, her breath shallow but controlled. Outside, the man waited with a patience that felt practiced, like someone used to being obeyed without resistance. "Yusuf sent me," he had said. The words echoed in her mind, not loud, but heavy enough to change everything. Hauwa stepped back slowly. Instinct, not fear, guided her. Because fear could freeze you. Instinct kept you moving. "Say what you came to say," she called through the door. There was a brief pause. Then the man replied, his tone calm, almost polite. "It would be better if we spoke inside." "No." Another pause. Then a slight shift in his voice, less patient now. "This doesn't have to be difficult." Hauwa leaned lightly against the wall, one hand pressing against her belly. "It already is." Silence stretched. Then he said, "You've made things harder than they needed to be." Hauwa's eyes closed briefly, then opened again, clear, focused. "Go back and tell Yusuf. I'm not asking him for anything. That's not the problem." The answer came quickly, too quickly, which meant it was prepared. "He's building a life," the man continued, "a future, and situations like this." He let the sentence trail off, but Hauwa understood. "Perfectly. I'm not part of his future," she said. "No," the man agreed, "but you're part of his past. And sometimes, the past needs to be managed." Managed. The word sat cold in the air. Hauwa felt something inside her settle. Not anger, something steadier, stronger. "I'm not something to be managed." A pause. Then the man said quietly, "That's not how people like you get to decide." The statement should have shaken her, should have made her afraid. But instead, it clarified everything. Hauwa stepped away from the door completely. "You should leave," she said, "and if I don't," she didn't answer immediately. Then she said, "Then you'll stay outside." Silence. Longer this time. Then footsteps, slow, measured, moving away. Hauwa didn't move until she heard the gate outside creak faintly. Only then did she exhale. Her legs felt weak, not from fear, from reality, because now there was no uncertainty left. This was happening, and it would not stop on its own. That night, Hauwa did not sleep. Not fully. Her body rested in fragments. Her mind remained awake, listening, thinking, planning. Because survival had changed. It was no longer about getting through the day. Now, it was about staying ahead of something she could not see clearly yet. The next morning, she did not go to the hub immediately. Instead, she sat on the edge of her mattress, her hands resting over her belly. "You're not going anywhere," she whispered softly. "Neither of us is." The baby shifted. A small movement, but enough. Hauwa nodded to herself. Decision made. Across the city, Idris stood in his office. His phone pressed lightly against his ear. "Yes," he said quietly. "I know." A pause. His expression darkened slightly. When another pause. Then he exhaled slowly. Understood. He ended the call, and for the first time, he did not hesitate. Minutes later, he was in his car. The city moved around him. But his focus remained fixed, because the situation had crossed a line from observation to interference, and that changed everything. At the Swiftcart hub, Hauwa arrived late. Not by much, but enough to be noticed. Mr. Bassi looked up immediately. "You're late again." "Yes, sir. Do you think this is a game?" "No, sir." He shook his head. "You're becoming a problem." Hauwa said nothing, because she already knew. He handed her fewer assignments. Lower value, short routes, not punishment, but preparation. The kind that slowly pushed someone out without needing to say it directly. Hauwa accepted them, because even now, she needed the work. By midday, the city felt heavier. Not physically, but mentally. Hauwa moved carefully, her awareness sharper than before. Every unfamiliar face, every lingering glance, every quiet shift in movement. She noticed everything now. Near a small junction, she paused briefly. The pain returned, stronger, more insistent. She leaned against a wall, closed her eyes, counted, waited. It passed, but slower this time, leaving behind a lingering tightness. A warning she could no longer ignore. "You should go to a hospital." The voice came from beside her. Hauwa turned. "Kemi," concern clear in her expression. "I'm fine," Hauwa said. Kemi shook her head. "No, you're not." Hauwa smiled faintly. "I will be." Kemi stepped closer. "Something's happening, isn't it?" Hauwa hesitated, then nodded. "Yes." Kemi swallowed. "Is it serious?" Hauwa looked at her. "Honest, I don't know yet." Across the street, the black SUV remained. But this time, it was not just observing. It was waiting. That evening, as Hauwa walked home, the air felt different. Quieter, more still, as if the city itself was holding something back. She reached her door, paused, listened. Nothing. She opened it slowly, stepped inside, closed it behind her, locked it, then leaned against it, her body finally allowing the tension to surface. A knock came, sharp, sudden. Hauwa froze. Not again. Her heart began to beat faster. This time, not controlled, not steady. Instinct, raw, immediate. "Hauwa." The voice was different, familiar. She knew it, but her mind struggled to place it. Then, "Hauwa, it's me." "Idris." She moved quickly, unlocked the door, opened it. And there he was, standing there. Not distant, not observing, present, real. Hauwa stared at him. "You shouldn't be here," she said. Idris stepped inside, closed the door behind him. "I know." A pause. Then he looked at her. Direct, certain. "They've started moving against you." Hauwa nodded slowly. "They already came." Idris's jaw tightened slightly. "I thought so." Silence filled the room. But this time, it was not uncertain. It was clear. Because now, everything had changed. Hauwa looked at him. "What do you want to do?" Idris held her gaze. For a long moment, then he said, "Not what I want." A pause. "What are you willing to do?" The question hung between them. Heavy, unavoidable. Because the answer would decide everything. Outside, Lagos continued, unchanged, unaware. But inside that small room, two worlds had finally collided, and neither of them would walk away, untouched. The room felt smaller with Idris inside it. Not because of his size, not because of his presence, but because of what he represented. A different world, a different kind of power. And now, that world stood inside Hauwa's fragile space where everything she owned could be seen in a single glance. The thin mattress, the metal bowl, the hanging baby cloth, the absence of everything else. Idris noticed it all. But he did not comment, because for the first time in his life, he understood that silence could be respect. "What are you willing to do?" he had asked. The question lingered. Hauwa stood still, her hand resting over her belly, her breathing controlled but uneven. Outside the city continued. Inside, everything paused. "I'm not running," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, but steady. Idris nodded slowly. "I didn't expect you to." Hauwa met his gaze. "But I'm not fighting blindly either." A pause. "I need to know what I'm facing." Idris stepped slightly closer. "Yusuf's family has influence. Not loud influence, quiet influence." Hauwa listened. "They don't create scandals," he continued. "They remove them." The words were simple, but their meaning was not. Hauwa exhaled slowly. "I'm not a scandal?" "No," Idris said. "But you threaten one." Silence. Deep. Real. Before Hauwa could respond, the pain hit. Sharp. Sudden. Different. Her body stiffened. Her hand gripped the edge of the wall beside her. Her breath caught. Idris moved immediately. Hauwa. She shook her head. It's fine, but it wasn't. This time, it didn't pass quickly. The pressure built. Low. Intense. Her knees weakened. Idris stepped forward, catching her before she could fall. You're not fine. Hauwa tried to steady herself. I just need. The pain surged again, stronger. Her breath broke. And this time, she couldn't hide it. Idris did not hesitate. We're going to the hospital. No, Hauwa said quickly, gripping his arm. I can't. You don't have a choice. The firmness in his voice left no room for argument. Not harsh, but final. Minutes later, they were outside, the black SUV waiting, the driver already alert. Everything moved quickly now, efficiently, controlled, a different world in motion. Inside the car, Hauwa leaned back, her eyes closed, her breathing uneven. The pain came in waves now, not constant, but building, returning, stronger each time. She pressed her hand against her belly. It's too early, she whispered. Idris sat beside her, watching, focused. Stay with me, he said quietly. I'm here. The hospital lights were too bright, too clean, too fast. Nurses moved with urgency. Doctors spoke in short, precise sentences. Everything happened quickly. Because now, time mattered in a different way. 8 months, one doctor said. Possible early labor. Blood pressure. Elevated. Prepare her. Hauwa lay on the hospital bed, her body no longer under her full control. The pain was no longer something she could manage quietly. It demanded attention. It demanded presence. It demanded everything. Idris stood nearby, still, watching, not interfering, but not leaving. Because now, this was no longer about choice. It was about consequence. Across the city, Yusuf Balogun received a call. She's at the hospital. Silence. Then with who? Another pause. The answer came. Idris Lawal. Everything shifted. Back at the hospital, Mama Zainab arrived. Calm, composed, but her eyes sharp. She moved directly to the room. Saw Hauwa, saw Idris, and understood everything. She's strong, Mama Zainab said quietly. Idris nodded. She has to be. Hours passed, slow, heavy, each one stretching longer than the last. The tension did not come from uncertainty, but from inevitability, because something was ending, and something else was about to begin. Inside the room, Hauwa fought through each wave of pain, not with panic, not with fear, but with the same quiet determination she had carried through everything. Breathe, the nurse said. Hauwa nodded, focused, present, because this was something she could not walk away from. And then everything changed. A cry, sharp, clear, alive. The room stilled for a moment. Then movement returned, quick, precise, but lighter now. It's a girl, the nurse said. Hauwa lay still. Her breathing slowed, her body finally releasing the tension it had carried for months. Tears slipped quietly down her temples. Not dramatic, not loud, just real. Idris stood at the edge of the room, watching. Not the child, not yet, but Hauwa. Because in that moment, he understood something he had never fully grasped before. Strength did not always look like power. Sometimes, it looked like endurance. Mama Zainab stepped closer, her gaze soft, respectful. You did well, she said. Hauwa turned her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. She's safe, the nurse smiled. Yes, and in that moment, everything else Faded. The threats, the rumors, the fear, all of it. Gone. Because what mattered was here. Alive. Real. Unquestionable. Outside the hospital, cars began to arrive. Black. Silent. Intentional. Yusuf's world had finally stepped into the open. Not quietly. Not indirectly. Direct. Present. Inside, Idris saw them. Through the glass. His expression did not change, but something inside him did. Because now, this was no longer something that could be observed, or delayed, or avoided. He turned back toward Hauwa, toward the child, toward the reality that had just been born into existence. And for the first time, his decision was no longer forming. It was made. Whatever came next, he would not step back, because some moments do not ask for permission. They demand presence, they demand action, they demand truth. And now, everything would come into the light. The hospital did not sleep that night, not because of noise, but because of presence. Outside, the line of black cars remained, engines silent, intentions not. Men stood at measured distances, dressed not in uniforms but in authority. No shouting, no confrontation, just quiet pressure, the kind that did not need to announce itself to be understood. Inside, the air felt different, not calmer, but clearer, because now, everything that had been hidden had stepped forward. Hauwa lay still on the hospital bed, her body exhausted, her mind slowly returning to itself. The pain had passed, but the weight of everything else remained. Beside her, wrapped carefully in a thin hospital blanket, lay her daughter, small, fragile, alive. Hauwa turned her head slightly, her eyes resting on the child. For a moment, nothing else existed. Not Yusuf, not his family, not the rumors, not even Idris. Just this life she had carried alone, this life she had protected through everything. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the baby's cheek. "You're here," she whispered. Her voice broke. Not from weakness, from release. The door opened quietly. Idris stepped in. Behind him, Mama Zainab followed. Neither spoke immediately, because some moments did not need interruption. Hauwa looked up. Her gaze moved from Mama Zainab to Idris, and for the first time, there was no distance in her eyes, only clarity. "They came," she said softly. Idris nodded. "I know." Silence settled. Then Hauwa asked the question that mattered. "What do they want?" Idris did not soften the answer. Control, a pause, and silence. Hauwa looked down at her daughter again. Her expression did not change, but something inside her solidified. "They won't get it." The door opened again. This time, without hesitation, a man stepped in, older, composed, dressed in quiet authority. Yusuf Balogun's father. Behind him, Yusuf followed. The room shifted, not physically, but in tension. Because now, everything stood face to face. Yusuf's eyes moved first, to Hauwa, then to the child, then away. He said nothing. His father stepped forward, measured, controlled. "We didn't come for conflict," he said. His voice was calm, practiced. "We came to resolve a situation." Hauwa met his gaze. "I'm not a situation." A brief pause. Then he replied, "That depends on perspective." Idris stepped forward slightly. Not aggressively, but clearly. "She's not alone." The older man's eyes shifted to him. Recognition, calculation. "Alhaji Idris Lawal," he said. A nod. "You've involved yourself in something unnecessary." Idris did not move. Not unnecessary. A pause. Not anymore. Silence. Then the older man spoke again. This can still be handled quietly. Hauwa's voice cut through. No. Simple. Final. He turned his attention back to her. You don't understand the consequences. Hauwa looked at her daughter, then back at him. I do. A pause. And I'm still here. The room held its breath. Because this was not defiance born from emotion. This was choice, clear, deliberate, unshaken. Yusuf finally spoke. Low, tight. This doesn't have to become public. Hauwa's eyes moved to him. For the first time. No anger, no sadness, just distance. It already is. He swallowed slightly. This will destroy things. Hauwa tilted her head. It already did. Silence. Heavy. Unavoidable. Mama Zainab stepped forward then. Her presence. Calm, but absolute. You came to manage a problem, she said. Her voice soft, but firm. But what you are facing. A pause. Is truth. The older man's expression hardened slightly. Truth can be controlled. Mama Zainab smiled faintly. No. A pause. Only lies can. The balance shifted, subtly, but completely. Idris stepped forward again. Not as an observer, not as a participant, but as someone who had chosen his position. If this continues, he said calmly, it will not remain quiet. The implication was clear. Not a threat. A fact. The older man studied him. Long, careful, because now, this was no longer one woman against a system. This was something else, something harder to erase. Finally he exhaled, slow, measured. This is not over. Hauwa met his gaze. I'm not going anywhere. A moment passed. Then he turned. Yusuf followed. Neither looked back. The door closed, and just like that, the room changed again. Not lighter, not safe, but different, because something had shifted, not in power, but in direction. Hauwa leaned back slowly, her body still weak, but her mind steady. She looked at Idris. Thank you. He shook his head slightly. You didn't need me to stand. Hauwa gave a faint smile. No, a pause. But you chose to. That mattered. Days passed. Slowly, carefully, but without further interruption. The pressure did not disappear, but it changed. Less direct, less immediate, because now it had resistance. Hauwa was discharged from the hospital with support she had not asked for, but this time, she did not refuse it. Not because she had changed, but because she understood something new. Acceptance did not always mean dependence. Idris remained present, not controlling, not overwhelming, just there, consistent, respectful. Weeks later, under a quiet sky, a small gathering took place. No grand announcement, no spectacle, just people. Real, present. Idris stood beside Hauwa. Not above, not ahead, beside. I'm not choosing you because of what happened, he said quietly. I'm choosing you because of who you are. Hauwa looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded. Because this time, there was no illusion, no misunderstanding, no hidden truth, just choice. And from that choice, a new life began. Not perfect, not easy, but real, built not on wealth, but on respect, on dignity, on truth, and in a world that often overlooked people like Hauwa Bello. That was the rarest thing of all. Sometimes the world teaches you that survival is enough, that staying quiet is safer, that accepting less is wiser. But stories like Hauwa's remind us of something deeper, that dignity is not given, it is protected. That kindness, even when it costs everything, still carries power, and that the right people will not choose you because you are easy. They will choose you because you are real. If this story touched your heart,
Take a moment to share where you're watching from and what time it is in your country. And don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe because stories like this deserve to be told, heard, and remembered.